Róisín Shortall, please.
Thank you. Minister, it was you who decided that the time is right to remove the €500,000 cap on bankers' pay and restore their bumper bonuses. You need to do so, we're told, so we can attract good people, the top talent, to run our banks. It seems no self-respecting, high-flying banker would want to work for less than €500,000, as if they couldn't survive on a salary that is more than double what the Taoiseach earns. People are feeling a sense of déjà vu, Minister, because we've all been here before. We were told just before the financial crash that bankers' pay was so enormous because they were employing the very best. It's worth recalling some of those salaries now, Minister. In 2006, the former CEO of Bank of Ireland, Brian Goggin, took home a salary just shy of €4 million. That bank subsequently required a €5 billion bailout from the state. Over in AIB, just before the crash, its CEO, Eugene Sheehy, was on a more modest €2.5 million per year. At the time, AIB said its policy, when it came to the pay of its senior executives, was to, quote, reinforce a high performance and ethical culture, end of quote. Is it any wonder that people are sickened by what you are now doing, Minister? Because we know where that high performance and ethical culture ended up. The state, every man, woman and child in the country, spent €21 billion bailing out AIB. More than a decade later, we still own 50% of that bank. The bank's alleged conversion from Gordon Gekko to sackcloth and ashes is also pretty hard to swallow, given their treatment of their own customers during the tracker mortgage scandal. This year alone, AIB was fined more than €96 million by the central bank for its role in inflicting devastating consequences on nearly 13,000 households. Meanwhile, Bank of Ireland was hit with a record €100 million fine for its role in the scandal that ruined thousands of lives and resulted in the loss of hundreds of homes. That was just 2 months ago. As if all of that were not bad enough, lifting these restrictions on bonanza pay and bonuses is especially galling given the cost of living crisis that is decimating the incomes of so many working families and workers generally all over the country. This decision is an insult to those working families. So, Minister, my questions are, where is the evidence that the banks have learned any lessons? Secondly, do you believe we need to work to achieve an ethical culture in our banks? And thirdly, how do you propose to prevent a return to that destructive ethic that greed is good within our banks and within wider society?
Thank you.
So I'll begin with the latter question regarding how we propose to get to a different culture, to the culture that the Deputy is referring to. That is by the steps that the government has already taken, this and previous governments have taken, with regard to the regulation of our banks. It is about the changes that are fundamental in nature that have happened in the regulation of the banking sector since those awful years, months and days of the global financial crisis. It is the reason why, since 2013, the Central Bank of Ireland have had legislation in place that led up to an enhanced fitness and probity regime. That means that if any individual is in a senior role in our banking system, they do have to go through a very thorough evaluation process, and ultimately we require the consent of our central bank to fulfil particular roles. It is also the reason why we are now requiring our banking system to hold a very, very high level of capital to prevent against the destructive and harmful and difficult and so traumatic consequences of a decade and a half ago in what banking difficulty can do to the rest of our economy. But we are now in an environment with regard to our banking sector with a fundamentally different regulatory environment to where we were in those years that led up to the financial crisis and to the banking crisis that afflicted our country. Now, Deputy Shortall, that is not to say for a moment that there are still not risks and difficulties, because there are. And that's one of the reasons why I will be bringing forward the legislation in relation to the senior accountability regime at report stage to Dáil Éireann, I hope, before the Dáil rises before the Christmas, to put in place a further element regarding how individual accountability within our financial sector can be deepened, can be enhanced, to act as firstly, a preventative arm for the very kind of risks you're talking about developing, and if they do, for making sure we have the ability to sanction individuals in addition to the laws that are already in place to do it. In relation to your comments regarding the banks themselves and the decision I made, you do know that for Bank of Ireland, every single cent that the state had to put in to support, to save that bank at that point in time, it's all been got back and more, €2 billion more. The decision that we made and that I recommended to government in relation to the bank cap only applies to a bank that the state no longer has a share in. And of course I appreciate the sensitivity of this decision, given the public hurt, given the public emotion that was caused and has been caused by all the issues that you've referred to. But we only have 3 retail banks left in our country. We have over 30 banks present in our economy. None of those banks have been subject to the pay caps, to the restraints that I made a decision to change, while the banks that employ the most Irish people, that hold the deposits of Irish people, nearly 200 billion of them are.
Time is up, please.
There's consequences to that, and the government has made a moderate change, recognising the risks and difficulties that are there.
So the question is, Minister, who is in your ear in terms of advising you on what is an appropriate salary for senior bank officials to be earning? Like, aren't you getting all your advice from insiders, from people who have skin in the game? Now, on what basis did you come to the conclusion that by paying somebody over half €500,000 a year is going to achieve a better customer service in our retail banks? On what basis did you come to the conclusion that by paying somebody that grotesque level of income, that we would somehow have a more ethical banking system? So what is your thinking? Because I think the public are finding it very difficult to understand, given the lives that were destroyed, given the enormous hardship that was imposed on so many people in this country, given the huge social and economic damage that was done by our banks, out of control banks. On what basis did you come to the conclusion that this would be good for the country, that this would be good for Irish business, it would be good for banking, and most of all, it would be good for the public who have to use our retail banks? What are the benefits that will accrue to ordinary customers and indeed to small business people?
For the answer to the question that Deputy Shortall put to me, here's the scenario that is at heart of the decision that the government contemplated on Tuesday morning. The all too real scenario where you could have somebody who's offered a job in either AIB, Bank of Ireland, PTSB. That person could be looking after the IT systems that are vital to the functioning of our banks. They will be offered a salary, they may even be offered a good salary. But there are many, many other banks, the vast majority of other banks and organisations, who not only will match that salary, they'll offer a bonus and variable pay on top of it. And that's the reality that we are in. And that's the reality that I have to acknowledge in decisions that are being made by the government. And of course what I have, Deputy Shortall, is a duty to how the harm of the past and the grave difficulties of the past can be compensated for, that those who were hurt, those who were harmed, that can be recognised in decisions that have been made by the over €200 million of fines that have already been levied on our banking sector to deal with the tracker mortgage scandal. But in addition to that duty, I also have a duty to allow our banks to be able to compete appropriately with large international banks that are in this country that don't hold our deposits and don't employ 20,000 people.
Thank you, Minister.
And that is the balance the government is seeking to attain.